idea, dude.
The Huolong heater is good. I mean, it's not like amazing or anything, but it's just good. Not a great weapon, but also not a terrible weapon. When I was making the Team Fortress 2 weapons tier list video, I put the Huolong heater in B tier, stating that I believed it was an underrated weapon compared to the rest of the miniguns. But some people in the comments disagreed, so I figured I would make a video explaining my reasoning for why I believe the Huolong heater is a solid primary weapon for the heavy weapons guy. Taking a look at the stats, the Huolong heater is pretty unique compared to the other miniguns. For starters, while you are revved up, you create a ring of fire around you that ignites enemies. The fire deals 12 damage on contact and deals 4 afterburn damage per tick, similarly to flamethrower afterburn. The ring of fire itself doesn't deal a ton of damage, it's mainly just used to ignite enemies so you can follow up with your minigun to finish them off. You also have to be pretty close to the enemy to get the fire to hit, but it is pretty useful for forcing enemies to stay at a distance where it can be easier to track them from. In theory, the Ring of Fire is also useful against spies, but in reality, it isn't, because the spy can just jump over the fire to get to your back. But it can still reveal them while they are invisible or disguised, so that's something. Overall, the Ring of Fire is pretty solid, but the weapon's more impactful upside is the 25% damage boost on burning players. While you can team up with friendly pyros and shoot players that they light on fire, it isn't needed because the Ring of Fire makes this stat much less situational than it seems. If you manage to get the jump on an enemy and ignite them with the Ring of Fire, you can shred through them insanely fast. In fact, assuming that the enemy is on fire, this weapon deals the second highest DPS in the entire game, being only 5% less than the Brass Beast. This weapon isn't perfect, however. It has two downsides, with the first of which being a 10% overall damage penalty. This is sort of offset by the previously mentioned 25% damage bonus on burning targets, but in reality, a 10% damage penalty isn't the end of the world. It's still a minigun, so it mows down enemies insanely fast, and it is nowhere near as impactful as some other damage penalties in the game. So what is this weapon's real downside? Okay, yeah, that is what holds this weapon back. Losing 4 ammo per second while revved up severely limits the amount of time you are able to stay revved up during fights, let alone how long you can fire the gun in the first place. This thing will chew through your ammo like nobody's business. You will have to adapt it and be smarter about when you decide to rev up your gun. You are no longer able to stay revved carelessly and wait for enemies to come to you. And because of this, you can be easily caught with your metaphorical pants down. You will not always be ready for the next enemy who approaches you. Because of this, the Huolong heater is defensively lacking. You are not always going to be ready to fight oncoming enemies. However, just because you can't let enemies take the fight to you all the time, does not mean that you can't take the fight to them. Due to the nature of the Ring of Fire and the 25% damage boost on burning players, this weapon encourages a much more aggressive, up-close and personal playstyle. One strategy that I found with using this weapon is to drop in on groups of enemies, ignite them, and mow them down with bullets, killing them insanely fast. This playstyle can be labeled as a sort of ambush or roaming heavy playstyle, and I find it to be one of the best ways to use this gun. However, there is another viable playstyle when using this weapon, the fabled Kart heavy playstyle. Yeah, it turns out that supergluing yourself to the payload cart is actually a pretty amazing strategy. Since the payload cart will keep refilling your ammo, the Huolong heater's most impactful downside is effectively removed, arguably making it stronger than the stock minigun in the Tomaslav, but only in that specific circumstance. You could also just use it normally, but that's boring. To close this video out, I want to highlight what secondary and melee weapons you should use with this thing. Starting with the secondaries. The food items are as usual very good options, but I think that the second banana stands out compared to the other options. You don't always need the full 300 health when healing yourself, so I find it beneficial to use because of the faster recharge rate. The other food item that I found myself utilizing a lot was the Delicos bar. The extra health it gives you is very helpful for when you are in a position to ambush a group of enemies. It lets you take a few more hits and could potentially keep you from dying. But surprisingly, I find that the 3 shotguns are actually pretty solid picks for secondary weapons. They give you a second reliable source of damage, making them very effective picks for when you need to ward off enemies without dipping into your limited supply of minigun ammo. Between the 3 shotguns, the family business is usually the strongest pick, mostly because of the larger clip size. It gives you a bit more room for error during sustained fights. The other 2 options are pretty decent too though, and at the end of the day, they all perform about as effectively as each other. For melee weapons, either use the Fists of Steel or the Gloves of Running Urgently. The Fists of Steel are a good pick for maneuvering around the map without having to worry as much about taking damage, but I find the Gloves of Running Urgently to be a little bit more effective because it helps you reach the front line faster and getting into positions where you can ambush an enemy. I can also see the argument for using the Holiday Punch if you are going for a more ambush-oriented playstyle. It lets you stun lock enemies from behind and helps you secure the kill more efficiently, but it's only effective against single targets, so I don't often find myself using it. And the rest of the melee choices are bad, so don't bother. At the end of the day, the Huolong Heater is a pretty decent weapon, but it will always be overshadowed by superior options. Even then, I strongly encourage that you give it a try. If this weapon were to ever receive a buff, then I would suggest allowing it to mini-crit burning players, but that might be a little bit too powerful, and let's be honest, this game will likely never receive another balance change ever. But in the meantime, give this weapon a try. You might have a good time.